Welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Amanda Valenta. I am the Deputy Division Lead here in USAID Washington's Energy Division, and I'm super excited to welcome you all to this webinar where we will be exploring energy efficiency opportunities in Sub-Saharan Africa. But before we kind of dive in, just to set the stage a little bit, let's just chat very quickly about why we're here talking about energy efficiency opportunities in Sub-Saharan Africa. Right now, countries in this region are working to provide accessible, affordable, and reliable energy while also navigating this very nebulous transition to net zero emissions. And at the same time, these countries are already seeing and will continue to see a very rapid population growth that has big time implications for energy demand for transportation and buildings and cooling in all of these areas. So the region's population is expected to grow by 78% to nearly 2 billion by 2043. And with that, we know that we're also going to very likely see carbon emissions rising due to all of the increased economic activity, et cetera. So one of the big reasons we're here, energy efficiency should truly be considered the first fuel to meet this type of huge growing demand. And today, our Scaling Up Renewable Energy program, SURE, along with some very exciting experts from the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs and CLASP, will be exploring what has worked in the past, what has worked elsewhere, some big intervention and policy tools for implementing energy efficiency in Sub-Saharan Africa. So next slide before we get into the real content, very quick housekeeping. You are being recorded. There is a Q&A box down on the right. Please use it throughout. We'll try to answer your questions as they come in, and we'll also very hopeful that we'll have a good amount of time at the end to answer them. There's also a link going into your chat, hopefully right now, for this briefer that you see at the bottom of the screen. This policy brief opportunities assessment is kind of what precipitated this webinar. We took a deeper look at some of these opportunities in Sub-Saharan Africa. So if you want to get more information before, during, or after this webinar, please go ahead and click into that brief and take a look. Okay, next slide. Let's meet our agenda. Lay of the land. I will do kind of a global overview on where we're at in terms of energy efficiency and some of the tools that will set the stage for this conversation today. Then I will turn it over to our experts who will dive a bit deeper on the policy and planning, some technology and services deep dives, as well as what we need in order to mobilize finance in this space. And before we do that, let's meet these panelists. We have Stéphane Delarue-Ducan, who is a senior program manager at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. She has more than 20 years of experience conducting innovative scientific research in the field of clean energy modeling and policy development in emerging economies. Before she joined the lab, she was in Paris working with the International Energy Agency there. We also have Ana Maria Serrano. She's a senior director of climate at CLASP, where she oversees and expands programs to reduce emissions from appliances across more than 40 different countries. She's coming to us with over 10 years of experience in international energy efficiency policy, market research, and technical analysis. And then last but not least, Rodrigo Chaparro is a climate advisor at Tetra Tech. He is helping organizations develop and implement cost-effective energy solutions that promote economic growth while navigating a transition to net zero emissions. This includes lots of different areas of expertise, including mitigation risk instruments, innovative financing mechanisms, maximizing carbon finance in various projects. So we're really excited he's here to talk finance with us a little bit later. Okay, next slide. Let's set the stage a little bit further. I'm sure many of you have seen this chart already, but really we're here talking about why energy efficiency for net zero. And again, that is because expanding our efforts in energy efficiency is just absolutely critical to reaching net zero, no matter which scenario you're looking at. Any way you look at it, you have to have energy efficiency in the equation. This is again, and I'll quote the International Energy Agency here, but the cleanest, cheapest, most reliable source of energy is what countries can avoid using while still providing full energy services for citizens. So here we're looking at some data that basically tells us right now, the path that we're on to improve our current rate of energy intensity, so the energy use per unit of GDP, is about 2% annually. But if we double that, we could improve our global energy efficiency by over a third, which is roughly equal to the current demand coming out of China. So again, this is just marking the huge opportunity in this space that we're going to dive into a little bit deeper today. Next slide. This, of course, does not come without challenges, whether they are real or perceived in the energy efficiency space. We hear about key barriers all the time, whether it is lack of information, lack of market understanding, lack of general knowledge about the benefits and opportunities in your country on energy efficiency. There are also real technical barriers that are out there, whether it's the actual equipment that we're not seeing or just the lack of capacity and staff needed to operate and implement efficient technology or implement standards and things like that. Financial barriers, again, some real, some perceived barriers, but there can be high upfront costs. We've seen a lot of success in various markets in terms of bulk procurement and aggregating demand to help tackle some of those high upfront costs. But again, there is also a big perception of risk when it comes to getting energy efficiency going. And then, of course, the regulatory and policy environment. We've seen a lot of success in terms of standards, getting them, passing them in our countries, but then we hit real barriers when it comes to enforcement and having capacity in country to enforce. So all of these things we'll talk a little bit more about throughout the presentation. Next slide. USAID has come up with a really nice framework for how to start thinking about these challenges and tackling them. So we've got our building blocks for energy efficiency. We have a full report on this available as well at our website. Maybe somebody can put that in the chat now as well. But we've got three key categories for the building blocks: energy efficiency standards and retrofits, market priming and financing, as well as policy planning. So on the standards and retrofits, these include evaluation of market dynamics, regulatory costs and benefits, development of technical standards, and stakeholder engagement. So you'll see things like creating better equipment performance standards for refrigerators and air conditioners, creating building codes and helping to move toward enforcing and mandating those building codes in country, as well as the implementation of the ISO 50001. We've got our market priming and financing to help tackle some of those financial challenges that we'll hear more about, figuring out how to really kickstart markets for high efficiency technologies by creating economies of scale and facilitating reductions of cost for the end consumer. Again, I mentioned we've seen this in some of our countries. India is an excellent example. They were able to do bulk procurement of LED light bulbs and drive the cost down by over 80% in just 2 years. So there are some real tools in our toolkit for helping to kickstart some of these market interventions. Bulk procurement is one of them. Incentive programs is another. Efficiency funds and other kind of innovative financial models come into play as well. And finally, policy planning, integrating energy efficiency into these national power development plans, into our integrated resource plans, into our low emission development strategies, our NDCs. All of these things are so critical. So figuring out how to really make sure that energy efficiency is mandated and represented at that very high level sends signals down the chain and outward to the market and can be hugely beneficial. So that's one of our key buckets as well. Next slide. So taking us back from the global level back down a little bit into Sub-Saharan Africa's context. We know that Sub-Saharan Africa faces a lot of challenges in this space, and they really do boil down to some of these issues on the right. The high cost of fossil fuels, again, somewhat due to disruption in supply chains that we're seeing globally post-COVID, but other nuances there as well. Really high official unemployment rates ranging from 10 to 30% of the labor force. Again, we're seeing that increasing energy demand as the population increases, and there's also a lot of urban migration happening there as well. And then again, this high potential for emissions to rise in the coming decades as the population doubles by 2050. So on the right, you're seeing some of the interventions. They're going to fall right in line with the building blocks that I outlined earlier. We'll talk about energy efficiency standards and retrofits. We'll talk about market priming and financing, policy planning and implementation. We're going to do deep dives on all of these things over the next hour. And I think without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Stéphane Delou-Ducan to focus in on our policy and planning piece and some of the interventions that we've seen work really well there. All right, Stéphane, take it away.
Thank you, Amanda. Hi, everyone. So why planning? So maybe next slide, please. All right, so while energy efficiency is mentioned in many of our overarching policy document and is recognized as one of the major pillars to achieve sustainable development, many countries are struggling to capture the full opportunity for energy efficiency. For example, energy efficiency is mentioned in most countries' NDCs. However, those targets are often vague and framed in terms of energy intensity, meaning primary energy per unit of GDP, without any detail on the measure to implement and the potential for different measures. So generally, what we suggest is to start with energy efficiency potential study that kind of give the overview of what's the potential of energy efficiency in the country. It assesses energy savings of different technologies and look at the penetration of different technologies in the market in the country. And this also then is used to develop a policy roadmap. And those policy roadmap help to prioritize actions to achieve the energy savings that are identified in the energy efficiency potential studies. And so on the left here, you see an example for Mexico, for Mexico City, for the building sector. And you see how energy efficiency can help to reduce emission and help actually to achieve 87% reduction of emission if through a different type of policy implementation. So that type of analysis is very useful to start and to look at what are the different options and what are the savings that can be expected for each of the different type of policies. Next slide, please. So policymakers have to the end a full toolbox of different type of policies. And so each of the different policies generally address specific barriers that Amanda presented previously. So often we recommend we recommend energy efficiency standards and labeling as the first, because those type of policy address a very important market barrier, which are information. In many markets, when there is no regulation, often there is no information on the type of on the energy performance of the type of products that are sold in the market. So energy efficiency standard and labeling address those type of market and help to show and give the information that is needed for the consumer to make informed purchase decision on the efficiency of the equipment in the market. So they are also very important because they are generally used by other type of programs and policies like procurement and financing to identify the more or very efficient equipment in the market, and then can be programs can be developed to target those more efficient equipment and accelerate the penetration of those type of equipment through different type of programs like procurement incentives, financing incentives, for example. Thank you. Next slide, please. So so here, in the full package of different type of policy, as I mentioned, we often recommend to start with energy efficiency standard and labeling, and then to look at different type of policy to complement and accelerate the penetration of efficient equipment. And here is a slide from the IEA that kind of show the importance of those type of policy. MEPS means minimum energy performance standards. and MCL is the mandatory comparative labels. And so here it's the status of this type of policy globally for different products. So you have first space cooling, then refrigeration, lighting, and industrial motors. And you see that across the world, there is approximately 80 countries that have implemented MEPS for space cooling, and then there is another 20 other countries that are working on implementing those policies. So, and you see different products, the scales is lower. For example, industrial motors, only 60 countries approximately have implemented that type of policy. So kind of give you the importance, I think. So what's we don't see in this graph, but this the number of countries that have implemented that type of policies have increased a lot over the last 10, 15 years. And we're hoping through our program that we can reach even more countries and have this type of policies implemented. Next slide, please. So while the other graphs was showing just the number of countries implementing standard labeling, and so they were just data point in one graph, I think what's important also to understand is that it's just not a regulation to implement. There is a full package of different implementation aspect that needs to be in place to have a program that can reach the impacts that are generally estimated in energy efficiency potential studies. So here is just a slide to kind of summarize all the different elements that needs to be in place for implementing standard labeling. So it's, making sure that there is a legal framework that provides the authority different stakeholders in the countries to implement the standard and the label. Then you have to have this some type of market analysis and cost benefit analysis to kind of set the minimum energy efficiency performance standard and see what's the cost and benefit for the consumer and also the country. You develop the standard and publish them, and then what's also very important is to make sure that you have compliance in the program. So monitor the market, verify claims, and also enforce regulation are very important to make sure there is a compliance in the regulation. And then obviously thinking about complementary program, as we mentioned before, as it's and thinking about the policy package that really help achieve energy savings over the whole technologies penetration. Next slide, please. So here is an example of implementation of standard labeling in South Africa, and so this is a part of the assistance that was provided to the South Africa government to help them implement their first standard labeling program. And so what we just want to show here is that through some of the collaboration, we help them also to estimate the energy savings potential, which is part of the planning. So we work with the planning unit at the Department of Energy, and help them to estimate the impact of the standard labeling program. And so here is just to show you the scale of the potential of this type of programs. I mean, South Africa obviously has very emission intensive electricity because mostly based on coal, but in terms of electricity saving, the program that covered about 10 products help to reach 7.1 terawatt hour of annual savings. This help the consumer to save on their energy bill about $47 per household. They were, so in terms of emission, obviously a very important amount, which is 6.8 million per of ton of CO2 per year. And there are other benefits that are more environmental, such as reduction of pollutant and water save. And I think what's important here is the goal of looking at the impact of the program is also to help show the importance of energy efficiency in achieving climate goals and other benefits for the country. Even reduction in South Africa. What's important also is reducing water use and other benefits that sometimes are not trivial, so can be shown through energy efficiency potential studies and planning. Next slide, please. So here is an example of Kenya, who implemented a national cooling action plan. And so energy efficiency potential studies have demonstrated in many countries, especially developing countries and emerging economies, that a lot of the growth in the demand for energy consumption is expected from the increase of consumer using cooling products like refrigerators and air conditioning, or fans, for example. So these products are very energy intensive, but they are also the source of potential energy savings or significant potential energy savings. In 15 years, the energy performance of refrigerators have been divided by 3. So if you look at the consumption of a refrigerator that is 15 years old, then you'll see the potential to reduce that consumption significantly. So because cooling is essential, an essential need for a society to develop, many governments across the world have developed national cooling action plans. So there are strategy roadmap, policy roadmap that promote sustainable and smart cooling across the countries. And they provide a framework for coordination and cooperation among stakeholders and government and other actors that can help implement different aspects of the strategy. So and in terms of policy, there are looking at the different type of policy, as we mentioned in the policy package previously, looking at minimum energy performance standards, but also looking at also the opportunity for financing type of programs. Yeah. So next slide. So this is my last slide, and just take away on that topic of policy and planning. So planning generally is key to communicate the value of energy efficiency to policymakers and to stakeholders. They are very important to integrate energy efficiency as a key strategy in broader policy objectives, like NDC. We haven't talked about that, but like integrated resource planning, important, the cooling plan that we mentioned, and also potentially other type of programs, which has, for example, economic recovery programs. So generally, we start with energy efficiency potential studies to assess the energy savings opportunities and look at the cost also, and the implication and the other benefits that comes with implementing energy efficiency, and then develop policy roadmap to prioritize actions to help reach the country to achieve those benefits and those savings. And this is generally supported by modeling, and that helps to track progress, report results also, especially in terms of energy savings and emission reduction, and also to raise the ambition to make impact. All right, thank you very much. I think next is Anna Maria.
Thank you, Stefan. Good day, everyone. So we just heard from Amanda and Stefan about the benefits of energy efficiency. They talk about the climate mitigation benefits, the energy savings as well. In this section, we are going to review some interventions that have been successful in Sub-Saharan Africa. We will be reviewing in particular energy efficiency standards and labels through the lens of a technology. If we can go to the next slide, please. We're going to be talking in particular about cooling. So in this context, cooling, we're referring to space cooling for comfort, fans, air conditioners, and we are also talking about refrigerators for storing food, storing medicine, and others. Of course, standards and labels are a key tool to address the cooling crisis. By that, we mean, the lack of access to cooling globally, and of course, the increase in sales of cooling equipment in this warming globe and in the context of, growing populations and increased access to electricity. In Africa in particular, the cooling crisis, I think, can be seen through 3 different lenses. One, of course, is the lack of access to cooling. This has been quantified by SE4O through the Chilean Prospects Report at about 389 million people that are at higher risk because of due to lack of access to cooling. Another issue is many countries in the region have not implemented yet the standards and labeling programs that prevent inefficient products from entering the markets. And what we are seeing is environmental dumping of substandard equipment that has, for instance, low energy efficiency, equipment that contain hazardous substances as well. CLASP has done an analysis just focused on room air conditioners, and we found out that in the African market, especially in 10 African countries, low efficiency room air conditioners made about 35% of new sales. So it's a significant number. And then I think another core issue is the import of secondhand appliances. We've seen that especially in cooling products, in refrigerators as well, in many countries as well. So we'll talk about these challenges and how we can provide some solutions. Next slide, please. Estefan, talk a little bit about the adoption of standards and labeling globally. So this puts the lens on specifically African countries. And then we'll talk about cooling. So on the left, you see countries that have implemented MEPS, minimum energy performance standards, and labeling for space cooling and refrigerator. About 40% for space cooling, 20% of refrigeration. So it's still an important amount of countries that need to adopt policies and opportunities, of course, to continue implementing energy efficiency policy. If we can go to the next slide. And just to talk a little bit how MEPS work. So this is what you see in this chart is models of refrigerators that are currently sold in Uganda. In the left axis, you see the energy consumption. So the higher the number, the more energy the refrigerator uses. On the x sides is the adjusted volume, so the refrigerator volume in liters, and then the line reflects our recommended minimum energy performance standards by the United for Efficiency Model Regulations. And how standards work: if the standard were going to be adopted at this line, every dot above of the line will not be allowed to be sold on the market, and those are considered inefficient refrigerators. So with the standards, you get rid of the least efficient products on the market. Next slide. So I said we were going to talk about specific examples in Sub-Saharan Africa. I want to start with the case of Ghana that has implemented standards and labels for many years. Since 2005, they've done comprehensive impacts analysis to understand the benefits of the cooling policies in Ghana. And you see here on the left, some of those benefits quantified: significant electricity savings, 10.16 terawatt hours. Standards and labels can also help in delaying the building of capacity. So in the case of Ghana, that translated into about 1,160 megawatts of capacity that was not needed because of the standards. We also talk about the benefits to consumers. So savings on the electricity bills, in this case of over 1 billion, and of course, climate mitigation and savings of tons of CO2 emissions of about 6.32. In the case of Kenya, the MEPS that were adopted for refrigerators and for air conditioners have a significant impact on the market. We estimated that the MEPS adopted in 2019 eliminated about 73% of the models of the least inefficient products of the market. And there's also support through energy efficiency of a transition to better refrigerants and to compliance of obligations under the Montreal Protocol, which phases out refrigerants that have high ozone depletion potential, high global warming potential as well. In the case of Kenya, that meant that through the intervention of adopting energy efficiency standards, one of the refrigerants that has very high ODP, ozone depletion potential, was eliminated, which is R22. Next slide, please. Other opportunities to scale up the markets and especially the adoption of high efficiency technologies. through a standards and labeling program is, of course, making the label better understood by consumer groups, making the label better understood by retailers. I mentioned in Kenya, the standard was implemented for air conditioners and refrigerators in about 2019. The EPRA, the agency who implemented the standard, decided to launch a consumer awareness campaign so that consumers understand how do I read the label, what does it mean, what do the stars mean. In this case, the more stars, the better. So you can see on the right, more stars, more savings. And these are campaigns that are targeted to consumers that have purchasing decisions. So through social media and other tools, you can make sure that you target the campaign appropriately and very successful in order to raise awareness of the benefits of the program as well. Next slide. Other mechanism to scaling up the adoption of standards and labels, and especially to remove some of those barriers related to the purchase price of the equipment are financial mechanisms. And in this case, we have a very successful example in Ghana that has the UFORI base and the Energy Commission of Ghana developed this innovative financing mechanism for refrigerators that allows users to pay through their monthly salary deductions, basically financing the purchase of more efficient equipment. Next slide, please. Other mechanisms or other business models to also remove some of those barriers are the use of, for instance, cooling as a service business models. And in this case, there is a technology provider that is in charge of installing and maintaining the appliance, and the consumer basically pays the use of the equipment, of the cooling system. And that model is called pay-per-service model. So this completely eliminates one of the challenges, which is the higher upfront cost of investment in a high efficient cooling equipment, and at the same time provides an incentive for the technology provider to make use of the most efficient equipment to increase their revenue as well. Next slide. Stefan talked a little bit as well about policy planning, how we incorporate all these interventions into a general planning document. In the context of cooling, we have seen many countries developing national cooling action plans with the idea to bring all the different interventions together, including efficiency, including transitions to better refrigerants, including actions to increase access to cooling as well. She talked about the case in Kenya, and including here a list of countries that have already developed or are developing national cooling action plans as well, as a mechanism also to bring all the stakeholders and identify key actions to enhance access to sustainable cooling. Next slide. I think this is the last one, some of the key takeaways then on this lens through technology and services. And I think as we've heard, we're expecting higher access of electricity, rising incomes, and of course, this is going to drive the ownership and the use of appliances and equipment in the Sub-Saharan region. So interventions like energy efficiency policy will be needed to slow the growth of electricity demand, and of course, to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are resulting from that energy use. We talk about the relevance of second-hand appliances in some market and how it's important to stop the import of these products, and that can be done through standards and labeling, and of course, improving MEPS and energy labels as well will contribute to further electricity savings as well. And overall, appliances can improve lives and livelihoods in the context not only on cooling, but other productive uses as well. So I think that I'll leave it like this, and then I'll hand it over to Rodrigo to tell us a little bit more about the financing aspect.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. So let's discuss now about how to finance energy efficiency. So overall, the energy efficiency projects have payback periods that can be easily between 3 to 5 years. But however, there is a high perception risk by investors and the financial industry. So one interesting thing is that the investors don't always perceive or are aware of these benefits and prefer to invest in other assets where they feel more familiar with the risk. So one example of this is the replacement in air conditioning in hotels in some areas. So in this case, it's very common that the owner prefer to invest in changing the lobby of the rooms rather than upgrading the air conditioning systems. So these are investments that will reduce the operational cost and they essentially don't do it because the equipment is still working. So, and on the other side, the financial institutions also trying to have a lack of trust in the technology and do not accept energy efficiency equipment as collateral. And neither they consider the energy savings as a positive income for the projects. So the institutions, the financial institutions, trying to evaluate the projects based on the balance sheet of the companies and not of the project. So that brings some additional some projects, some challenges to them. So additional challenges for the projects on energy investment in energy efficiency are the project size. Normally, these are small size investments that requires large upfront costs compared to other technologies. And one additional thing of these projects is that when the banks intend to measure the energy savings or CO2 reduction, that involves some additional transaction costs that have to be borne by the project. Next slide. So over here, one of the things that has happened over the last years is that there has been some innovation or instruments to try to mitigate or transfer those risks that I just mentioned. So normally in the energy efficiency projects, you have three types of risks: the performance risk, the credit risk, and the regulatory risk. So the instrument that have been developed usually try to cover the first two ones, the performance risk or the credit risk. So in this context, various instruments have been proposed and tested in developed markets, but also and adapted locally, but also some new instruments have been emerging in developing countries that have been transferred internationally. So we are going to touch on some of these and provide some examples in Sub-Saharan Africa also. The very interesting thing is that the innovations has been developed in the supply side as well as in the demand domain. So that means that essentially in the supply domain, the intention has been normally to bring efficient or concessional financing and reduce the transaction costs of the projects. And in the demand side, the interventions are intended at the project level to reduce the delivery risk of the savings. So in the red box of the side, you see some of the names of the instruments, from demand side management to other instruments like dedicated funds or risk transfer instruments. So we're going to talk about these in the next few slides. So next slide, please. So the first example in this is the utility demand side management for incentives. This is also known as on-bill financing. This instrument has been in the market essentially in the developed economies since the 70s. And the way it works is that the utility incurs in the initial cost of the technology upgrade, finance the consumer, and collect the loan through the utility bills of the customer. And the customer benefits from the energy savings. So this is often the most common energy efficiency financing mechanism in many low-income developing countries where the financial institutions are not as well developed. And also it has been also the target of the residential sector. One of the advantages is that allow the utilities to cope with the growing electricity demand and avoid large investments required for new supply capacity. This type of instrument has been normally attractive for low investments. That means in investments that are in the hundreds to the $1,000, and with the repayment is between 2 and 5 years. An example of this is Eco-Fridges in Ghana that was already mentioned. It's focused on the replacements of refrigerators and air conditioners. The program in Ghana includes the proper collection and disposal of used appliances, particularly to avoid the release of some depleting substances. So as you see, these particular instruments address the performance and financial risks in low capital investments. So the beauty of this is that it's very simple in terms that it has only three players, that is the customer, the utility, and the contractor. Next slide. So this is a second scheme or second instrument that is the devoted credit lines. So essentially, a financial institution create a loan for energy efficiency investments. That's the basic principle. So the end user takes the credit and deals with the contractor and pays for the equipment of the services. So normally this is technology oriented, so this is intended for specific technologies. So, and ideally, the project is structured to tie the loan payments to the energy savings. That's the whole concept. And the way it works also that the banks have a positive list of technologies and estimate the savings by default. For example, for the lighting or motors, based on some thresholds that they already have based on for example, on the state standards and labeling. For more complex projects, normally these credit lines devote some technical assistance to estimate the savings and the cash flows that the project will incur. So in this kind of schemes, the commercial banks use their own funds or use concessional finance from international agencies or guarantees from the government. The challenge of this project is normally to have a reliable pipeline of projects. And so therefore, most of the technical assistance is for that part to establish a good pipeline of projects and also to establish marketing campaigns. The example of this is the Sunrise program. As you see here in this program in Ghana, has a list of technologies that are eligible for the loan. And the program provides grants up to 10% and free technical assistance. And of course, the loans has to be on competitive terms. So over here, the difference, as you see, is a bit more complex scheme, but where you have essentially three players that are the customer, the financial entity, and the contractor. And the government and the development banks might be or not might be present in these kind of programs. This program is also attractive for investments in the thousands to the $100,000 US dollars, and repayments are in the 2 to 5 years. Next slide. Here is a bit more complex scheme it's called the energy savings companies. So essentially, the energy savings company is a contractor that goes beyond the sales of equipment. So an ESCO understands the cash flows of the energy savings and their incomes come from the energy savings. So what happens is that the ESCO, the energy saving company, do the project development, the financing and the implementation, and receive payments from the customer based on the savings. So the ESCO takes the loans from the financial institutions to purchase the equipment and takes the performance and credit risk. In some models, the ESCO only takes the performance risk and the owner is the one who takes the financial risks. So one of the things that is important is that the ESCO model is based on energy savings performance contracts. Therefore, to be successful, these kind of schemes need that the country has a solid regulatory environment. So this is one of the requirements. In this type of scheme, normally the contracts are for 5 to 20 years, and the investments are in the 500K to the 5 million range. And in this case, as you see, you have a different type of players. You have the customer, the financial entity, and the ESCO now. Next slide. Over here, we have another scheme is that dedicated funds. So essentially are funds devoted for specific for funding projects in energy efficiency. So in the fund, in the revolving fund, in this case, serves as a financial entity and service provided in front of the customer. So the revolving fund hires the service providers to implement the projects and monitor the energy savings. And the beneficiary makes fixed payments based on the baseline of the energy bill, and the fund pays to the utility or the energy supplier. So the incentive for the beneficiary is to have a lower energy cost in the bill. So that's the only reason he would be interested in that. And the scheme is intended for more complex projects. So it's not technology oriented. So it's not for a particular technology, but projects where need more complex interventions. And normally it's in buildings, for buildings or such as hospitals, schools, and public buildings. One of the challenges is that require proper auditing and the estimation of balance of baselines. So that's one of the things the challenge is to develop again, in this case, also a good pipeline of projects. So in Africa, there is in Sub-Saharan Africa, there is in Morocco, the Sustainable Energy Fund for Africa that is working with this approach. And right now has a project that has been received a grant to develop a super ESCO for energy efficiency investment. One important point of this type of fund is that it has to be sustainable. So it has to create its own cash flow to keep the fund working for some time. So in the players here again, the customer, the revolving fund, and the contractor. Next slide. A final example in the risk sharing facilities. This is a bit more complex scheme. In this case, I'm just presenting the one of them, that is the energy savings insurance. So what happens is that the provider guarantees the savings to the customer through an insurance. The insurance constitutes a second layer of protection after the performance contract. So in this context, the insurance mitigates the performance risks. One of the advantages is that the projects with insurance receive better financial terms from the financial entity because the insurance can also be transferred to the financial institution. This type of investment, this type of scheme is intended mainly for small and medium enterprises when you have standardized technologies that facilitate the project monitoring. Normally, to reduce the transaction cost in this scheme, the savings are monitored annually to reduce that cost. One of the disadvantages of this is that you have to include two new players that are essentially the insurance companies and the validated entities. But it has the benefit that is perhaps the project with the lower risk. Right now, this scheme is being developed in Morocco with the support of BASE and the Society for Engineering Energy. Next slide. So in summary, there have been new initiatives created or developed to remove financial barriers and the risk perception. So, and the schemes that have been created seek to transfer the performance risk and the financial risk among the different market players. So the range of financial options includes from simple solutions for specific technologies to more complex schemes like the use of insurance for that. Another important thing with this scheme is that the successful implementation normally requires technical assistance. And one of the recommendations is that the results has to be evident in 2 years to keep the momentum. The very important thing over here is that the instruments depend on the size of the projects and target markets. So that means that there is no one solution that fits all the types of programs. But it depends normally on the size of the project and the target market. So you can apply different financing solutions on that. So that's all from my side. Thank you. Back to you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo and Ana Maria and Stefan. So we do have a few questions that have come in the chat. And maybe since, Rodrigo, we were just chatting finance, I'll lob this first one at you. It's from Libuang. I'm not sure which country you're chiming in from, but they asked, are there any case studies for microfinancers financing energy efficiency projects?
Yeah, indeed, that's another type of instruments that, because the list can be really long. So I just wanted to mention a few of them. But microfinance is also another aspect that has been really moving also the agenda. But again, is one of the challenges of this is the need to have like a sustained efforts on that. So the funds has to be really sustainable in the long run. And in that case, you would have to deal with institutions, financial institutions that are more interested in this kind of microfinance schemes.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Maybe turning back over to Ana Maria, and I know, Ana, you worked through your presentation pretty quickly to get us back on time, so please feel free to expand on anything we might have skimmed over as well. But one question came in for you directly. Can you speak to the data collection issues on product sales and efficiency ratings that's been challenging in many developing partner countries? This is from William Prindle.
Yeah, and I think it's an important question because the data and the information on baseline efficiency and opportunities is the basis for any policy decision making. So in general, we start with a market data collection, and the challenge, as the participant is saying is in countries where we don't have infrastructure, when we don't have standards and labels, it is hard to know what is the performance of products that are available on the market. I think the situation has changed significantly in the past years. We know that many countries in Africa have adopted standards and labels. So, the recommendation is look at what your neighbors are doing. Sometimes the market can be similar. What we'd like to do is we still want to collect information on the products that are available on the market, and sometimes you can get information on a model based on performance as well. But there are many initiatives that are taking place regionally as well, especially in the East African community, in the SADC community, where efforts are already in place to try to establish what are the best efficiency levels for the region. And I think that's a great starting point for countries that are interested in looking at standards and labeling. Just look at the neighbors, look at the regional associations as well, because there's been already a lot of efforts in data collection, in understanding efficiency baselines, and in providing recommendations of efficiency levels as well that are appropriate for the region or for the countries.
Thanks so much, Ana Maria. And another really great question, I think, that came in from William Prindle. Maybe I'll lob this over to Stefan to kick us off, but others, please feel free to chime in. The question is, in the implementation strategy area, can the panelists speak to the role of voluntary programs like labeling-based promotional programs like Energy Star and utility incentive programs? These can be key to building market share so that minimum energy performance standards become easier to set and to increase over time. So maybe I'll start with Stefan, but open it up to all of you.
Yeah, so Energy Star is kind of an endorsement label. And so what we see in many countries in Africa is that they generally have the labels that are different stars. And so, like Energy Star is generally 20% more efficient than the standard. And so, for example, if you have a 3-star, or depending on which label you're looking at, but you can have a 5-star that will be, the equivalent of Energy Star, a type of label a program. And then DSM type of program, or utility incentive program, yes, it's kind of the policy package and the complementary type of policy, and those will help to target those like very more efficient equipment, and have specific programs like on-bill financing, or like the other type of programs that Rodrigo talked, and then a financing program so that those more efficient equipment that are 5 stars or Energy Star can penetrate in the market, and those after like in a virtuous cycle at some point will become the new standard. So yes, this is a kind of a complementary of this type of policies.
Amanda, if I may add to the question as well, and I agree with everything that Stefan said, just to say, what we are seeing is MEPs are the preferred policy intervention by many governments. And I think it goes back again to the first question, because it sets up the framework. When you do a minimum energy performance standard, you select a test method to measure performance, you define an efficiency level that is appropriate for the market, and that's the basis for all the other interventions that Stefan and Rodrigo talk about. So really, governments prefer MEPs, and it's also the most impactful tool at that, voluntary energy labels, endorsement labels like Energy Star can use as a foundation for additional, scaling up of energy efficiency interventions.
Yeah, I would just add that I think this is one of the things that the banks love, because it helps them to create this positive list of investments. The banks usually have a challenge to decide what kind of investments to finance. So when you have this list of energy efficiency equipment, so they create this list of equipment they want to finance, and it's easy for them to make a quick evaluation and decide if they are within their target and facilitate the loan. So I would say that indeed, yes, these are the most positive and efficient way to start with these programs.
Thank you so much, everybody. Really great points. We have a few more minutes. Maybe I'll just turn, our last few questions are in the finance sphere, I think. So one, maybe all of you are welcome to opine, but maybe we'll start with Rodrigo. In terms of, I mean, we looked at several different models of innovative financing. I think maybe one bigger question is kind of like, where do you start? What do you think has been the most successful of these models, or the easiest to kind of implement if you're at a starting point? And then a follow-on question, Rodrigo, is how can blended finance help in reducing barriers toward addressing energy efficiency and climate change?
Where to start? I would say that perhaps the simplest scheme is really the credit lines, with the banks really create the budget lines for energy efficiency investments. So I would say that will be the most simple scheme when involving the financial institutions, beyond the on-bill financing. So that will be the best way to engage really the financial institutions in the countries to create the energy efficiency credit lines for them. One important thing in that is that you have to make sure that the banks spend their time really working what they do best, is in the risk assessment of the client, and not to focus on the energy savings, because sometimes that's one of the big risks that the banks make, is that they try to focus too much on the technical side. And what happens is that they always have challenges because the commercial officers in the banks are not very familiar with that. So set aside the team that do the assessment of the energy savings, and then focus the bank in the risk assessment, which is essentially what they do. So that will be my suggestions in that context. So credit lines with the technical assessment conducted by specialists or for specific units, or just creating these positive list of investments to make the life easier. That's perhaps the best first suggestion. The second, how climate blending finance can support this. Yeah, as I mentioned, one of the things that has these type of programs is the high transaction costs in some cases. So blended finance can help reduce the transaction cost by providing the technical assistance. So with the technical assistance, you can start creating this portfolio of projects that are really, that you can rely on the savings. That could be one option. And the second, to make sure that the banks also understand that this project has lower risk than they perceive. So in that way, if they understand really the risks of the projects, they will be able or willing to provide loans at a better rate that traditional line of credit. That's the second point that will be tied to the first. So good technical assessment of the projects, reduce the transaction cost, and improve also and facilitate to the user to get better terms. So in that context, the concessional finance can help that, can help in those two fronts. Use the funds for technical assistance, and also to facilitate, reduce the credit conditions for the user.
Fantastic, thanks, Rodrigo. Okay, I'm gonna put one more question in there because I think this is gonna help us make a nice final stand for, or final plug for energy efficiency standards. Sarah Hughes wrote, in a small resource poor environment with competing demands for funds, setting up testing labs and ensuring enforcement of EE standards might not be feasible. What mechanisms do you see that might be effective for encouraging adoption of EE standards in smaller states? So I'm gonna say, maybe Stefan, take the first crack at this, because I think much of our work does not necessarily require your own kind of testing labs and things of that nature, and is a much smaller financial level lift. But let's let Stefan chime in on this. Stefan, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes. So, I mean, testing is the gold standards for verification. So there are many different aspects of the program that you can set in place for first, monitoring the market, through, for example, a registration database, and smaller intervention that can help make sure there is compliance. Then, so testing. Generally, there is also, when it comes to standard labeling, there is also a lot of coordination and collaboration at the regional level. And there is different aspects of that. So I think, when it comes to the standards themselves. There is a collaboration on harmonization, and then there is also coordination on testing and looking at maybe at the regional level if there is an opportunity to pool resources and have testing. And so we've seen some collaboration there in East Africa and other region. But really, I mean, what's important is, but I just want to emphasize that there is a lot at the national level that needs to be done when it comes to implementation of the standards, and a lot of different smaller incremental intervention that can be implemented to help on the compliance that doesn't need testing. So I'm sure Anna Maria.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We are definitely at time now, and these are some great questions, and we didn't get to all of them, but I will wrap us up. I'll point you all toward the brief survey that's in the screen. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us, and for all of the participants. And if you want to learn more, SURE's Scaling Up Renewable Energy program has a huge, we've got our website online. You can learn more or contact us directly. The Energy Efficiency for Development program also has a website. You can also contact us directly to learn more there, as well as CLASP. I'm sure Anna Maria would be happy to chat more about any of these things. So please reach out, and we will be sending this recording out, and hope to see you all again soon. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you all.